Welcome back to campus, volunteers, and welcome to Globalization and Justice, Sociology 342. What I'm going to do today is offer three presentations. The first, as you can see here, is an overview of our course syllabus. The second one will be a guide to our Canvas site. And finally, the third will be a lecture on the sociological imagination. This being an asynchronous online course, I'll unfortunately not meet most of you face to face, so allow me to introduce myself here. My name is Grady Lowry. I'm a teaching assistant professor here at the Department of Sociology. I'm originally from Middle Tennessee, the West Nashville area. Like lots of people in Nashville, I actually started out in the music industry. As a matter of fact, I didn't attend college until I was 22. And even then, I entered MTSU, a university, for those of you not familiar with the area, um, about 45 minutes southeast of Nashville. I entered that university as a music major, a jazz studies major. I later switched to anthropology, which is a social science like sociology. And as a matter of fact, the department at MTSU was the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. So I earned my bachelor's in anthropology and worked most of the first decade of this century as an archaeologist. What led me to academia, you may ask? In 2008, there was the Great Recession, a phenomenon that we will address directly in this course, and it had a direct impact on my life personally. um, Archaeology in this country is very much tethered to development. The financial crisis of 2008 led to a freeze on development, and thus archaeology largely came to a standstill. So I was faced with rolling layoffs and just a lot of uncertainty. And I needed, as a young, excuse me, a young parent, I needed more financial stability. So I took that opportunity to attend grad school again at Middle Tennessee State University. But the Department of Sociology and Anthropology doesn't offer a master's in anthropology or archaeology. So I was forced to um, pursue a master's in sociology, and I soon found out that I had a knack for sociology, specifically theory. Now, I teach a course, 321, many of you have had, strictly on theory. I have other courses that are pretty theory heavy, like political sociology, social movements. This is another course, particularly here in the first few weeks, that's a little theory heavy, but we'll get to that shortly with our third lecture. So, just some kind of facts about me. I play bass and guitar in a local blues band. As I had mentioned, I started out as a jazz studies major. I had just mentioned that I worked in archaeology, and I'm a huge sports fan. So, uh, invariably, I'm going to use sports analogies in this course. Apologies to those of you who are not sports fans, but I assure you the way that I bring it in doesn't require any great understanding of sports. But just, again, fun fact, my favorite teams are the Tennessee Titans. I'm from Nashville after all. I've been seeing the Tennessee Titans slash Oilers since 1997. I'm a season ticket holder. The Memphis Grizzlies, I lived in Memphis prior to Nashville. I've kind of worked my way east from Memphis to Nashville to Knoxville, and of course the Tennessee Vols. So why do I teach sociology? Why did I say that I kind of had a knack for this more so than I did for archaeology, frankly? Well, my goal is to demonstrate that it's applicable towards understanding this increasingly complicated world None of my classes is that demonstrated more than in this one, a class on globalization, extraordinarily complicated. Even the word globalization presents issues. This course is conducted asynchronously online, which means you need to keep up with the weekly modules on Canvas. Again, the second presentation that I'll share to Canvas today will outline the most important parts of Canvas for our class, one of them being the weekly modules. And if you have any issues with Canvas, I know most of you are juniors and seniors, but some of you may have transferred to UT. These are hyperlinks. I know that they're typically blue or a different color. If you see something underlined in my presentations, those are links. So if you need more assistance, you can search with that. If you have additional issues, by all means, contact me. So the course offers students a sociological examination of globalization and related social justice issues. So a quick point about this label, social justice. Clearly, we're in a pretty politically contentious moment, not only academically across the country, but specifically sociology, and even specifically sociology here at the University of Tennessee. So, what we're going to do, starting with my first lecture on the sociological imagination, is show how we can tackle these politically contentious topics in a sociological, i.e., social scientific way. So, my approach is unique in that respect. Uh, we are not in this class to be politically indoctrinated. We're trying to filter out the political ideological noise that distorts our understanding of reality. So we'll get to that in more detail later on. And so by the end of the course, you'll understand major economic, political, and cultural perspectives on the study of globalization. So the modules that I just mentioned, they break down in roughly 4, maybe 5 different themes. So first of all, after we discuss the sociological imagination, we'll quickly transition into the question of what globalization is. Then we'll move to the question of how far reaching has the process of globalization been. We'll develop our skills in knowing how contemporary phenomena have been important components of globalization. And we'll assess whether globalization is harmful to the well being of individuals, cultures, and countries. So, that last one, a pretty politically loaded theme, but we're going to look at it not necessarily across a political continuum, but we're going to actually focus on the two kind of fringes of the political continuum. So, like extreme left responses and extreme right responses. More on that in a minute. So, probably what most of you are principally concerned with, assessment and grading. Typically, my classes, I don't have a lot of assignments. This one has a few more since we're online, particularly being asynchronous. So, we have one exam, one big midterm that counts for 300 points out of 1,000. Excuse me. Um, then we have active learning exercises. Think of these as quizzes. They're not designed to be all that demanding, but just to kind of keep us on top of where we are each week. The critical reading notes. This is something that my students who have taken 310 with me are familiar with. For those of you who haven't taken 310, think of this as an annotated bibliography. I believe I have 4 um, of these, so you're going to annotate 4 readings throughout the semester. And then there's a presentation. So this is also something my students in 310 and 321 are familiar with. So just a summary of one of the readings for the week. And since this is an online class, you'll upload a presentation like I'm doing now. And then finally, something that's definitely different from my other courses is we'll have a weekly discussion forum. And this is what I'm doing um, in as a substitute to class participation. So think about this as participation and attendance points. So there'll be a series of prompts posted to discussions on Canvas, and you and your classmates will respond to this, and hopefully this will generate some discussion. The required text is located on Canvas, as you can see with the sticky note to the bottom right under Vol Books course materials. So that's a link. And we'll read heavily from this textbook. The additional readings will come in the form of PDFs that will be posted under the Files tabs and also with the week's corresponding module. So just some kind of keys to success. First of all, hopefully this is obvious, but you got to have consistent and reliable access to the internet. This class is completely online, so that's a, a principle, a key to success in this course. And also note everything on your personal calendar, specifically the presentation. Now it's asynchronous, so there's some degree of flexibility in the class. I'm not going to be some huge stickler for due dates and so forth. Again, because we're kind of coming and going on our own time in an asynchronous class. But the one thing that we have to nail is that presentation, because um, all of us are relying on you on that day. So just make sure when you volunteer for a presentation, you're picking the date, stick to it. Next, nail the early material. As I said, Thursday, I kind of think in Tuesday and Thursday. So in terms of lectures, and I think that's kind of how I'm going to handle this class. You'll do your readings like on Monday. I'll post a lecture Tuesday, maybe an additional one Thursday. But this first one that we're going to have this week on the sociological imagination, it's extremely important. Now, a lot of you have heard this lecture before, and you're probably in great shape. But I do this in my 300 and 400 level courses just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because some of you are not sociology majors, and I don't want anyone to feel like they're at a disadvantage. So we'll get you up to speed very quickly, but we have to nail that early material. Next week, we're going to go into the questions of what is globalization, the history surrounding the concept. So this stuff is really important for us to understand the issues that we're going to be addressing throughout the semester. So similarly, don't get behind. Do not reach out to me after you've reached a point of irreconcilable crisis. So last spring, in my 321 class, a pretty dense reading list in that class, if you haven't had it, I had a student approach me the last week of the semester, and he revealed to me that he had only come to class one time to do his presentation. He had zeros on everything else. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And he asked me what he needed to do to pass the class. And I was like, how confident are you in completing, roughly 200 years of intellectual thought in a weekend? I mean, as you might imagine, this is not something you could do. And if you can do it, you shouldn't be at UT. You should be at Oxford or something. So just stay on top of things. That's what those two check marks are getting at. And then, of course, excuse me, I've had allergies really bad. That's one reason I'm late getting this to you. Check your UT email and Canvas site every weekday. I might post some things on weekends, but if you get to it by Monday, you'll be in good shape. Okay, so the late work policy, as I just mentioned, it being asynchronous, I'm not going to be a huge stickler. Like there'll be a due date, right? So maybe I'll post something on a Monday and it's due Sunday. So you have a long window to complete some of these things, but just try to stay on top of it, because my fear is, with us not seeing each other, multiple times a week, we might have the tendency of drifting off. And so I want us to stay on top of these due dates for your benefit, right? Because I know what it's like being a college student, and you're like, hey, this week I'll concentrate on this class. This week I'll get caught up in 342 on the weekend. Well, I'm going to watch the Vols game. And the next thing you know, it's snowballing out of control. So just try your best to stay on top of things so that it doesn't, introduce some sort of log jam in a few weeks. But I never ever offer extra credit. Like, so if you have plenty of opportunities to keep your grade up if you just stay on top of things. I think if you read, for example, my professor's reviews, and most people say that the class is pretty easy to get an A. That is, if you stay on top of things. That's an important component to this. Like, if you give a real effort and you stay on top of your assignments, you'll be in good shape. And then the academic integrity thing, this comes directly from our course syllabus, which once again is located on Canvas under Files, under Course Syllabus. If you scroll down to the very bottom, it's probably what you're most interested in, is the course calendar. But right before that, we talk about academic integrity. Basically, it just says don't use AI to cheat. So once again, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the syllabus, you'll see that our course calendar is broken up into 5 units. So the first one is what we're dealing with this week. What is sociology? A crash course in the sociological imagination. This is the reading that I shared to Canvas. I'm a little bit of a go-getter, I guess. I shared this stuff like mid-July, but it's there. I wanted to give those of you who are go-getters the opportunity to see the Canvas site as soon as possible. The syllabus, the first reading, it's all there. And then next week, we're going to jump into the history and theory behind the concept of globalization. I've learned that people kind of mix up globalization with multiculturalism. So we're going to get clear on the distinction between those two terms. Then we're going to move into an empirical survey of the effects of globalization, namely global capital. The final 2 units have to do with the responses, political responses, social movements. So one of my areas is social movement scholarship. So I've written both on radical left-wing movements and also extreme right-wing movements. And so that's what I'm going to be pulling from here. So first, we're going to look at left-wing expressions of discontent with globalization. Like, what is it the left finds problematic with globalization? Then we'll conclude with a review of right-wing expressions of discontent with globalization. And this, for our purposes, will namely come in the form of religion. So another area of mine is the sociology of religion. Those of you who've had me before know that I bring religion into the conversation quite a bit, where we're going to see how Christians and Muslims, namely, have responded to globalization. So that's kind of how the syllabus is organized. Please do review the course syllabus and know that there's 2 different places that you can locate, I should say 2 different versions of the syllabus, so to speak, on the Canvas. So the first one that you'll see in the left column, it's just an overview of the calendar, like the weekly readings. But the table never formats quite that well on Canvas. And I keep it there just so that you can get a quick overview. But that's not the complete syllabus. So to find the complete syllabus, go to the module for this week. It'll be linked there. In fact, I think it's right at the top of the module. You can also find it under files and just simply course syllabus there. So that's the complete syllabus. All right, so I'm looking forward to this semester. I will admit up front that this is a new experience for me. I have never taught an asynchronous class, I should say, with the exception of spring 2020 during COVID, and we are all forced into that modality. But yeah, it's a little bit different for me. So it's going to probably take me a bit of time to kind of hit my stride, so to speak. It's a kind of disembodying experience, just kind of speaking to a laptop and not to a group of people. But I think we'll have a great semester. And if you have any questions or even suggestions, as I said, this is a new experience for me as well. Let me hear it, and I'm glad to be your professor, and I look forward to a great fall.